Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the bin that you see right here, top left, is the bin that I've got African nightcrawlers in, and it's been around for 182 days. 182 days is the equivalent of 26 weeks, and that's exactly 1/2 of a year. So this system has been vermicomposting, composting with worms, for half a year now, for 6 months, and I believe that the time has come to finally bring this system to a close. It was 26 days ago, not 26 weeks, 26 days ago, that we started into the migration of the worms out of the compost because we had let the bin sit for a little while after it was done doing the everyday composting of putting, kitchen scraps and household waste in there for the worms to break down. We had given the system a few days, or actually a few weeks, to sort of just focus on breaking down those materials. And then 26 days ago, we set up a nice edge of the bin over there after the system had gotten no food for a couple of weeks. Once the worms were nice and hungry and motivated to go seek out some nice moisture and some nice food. And 26 days ago, we had started them into the migration of the worms out of the material. We came back in here after the first 10 days. We even added some more food into here. And then 8 days after that, we came back and we added more food once again. And now, after 26 days, I believe the time has come, based on what we saw last time we were in here 8 days ago. It did seem like we were very close. And at this point, I would assume that 8 days later, we've probably got the majority, if not all, the worms out of the finished compost and ready to be moved into their new home. So, up here on the bench, I've got a number of things laid out to help us get the job done. I've already prepped a nice bin for them. And that's the big bin that you see right there with the newspaper and the cardboard sitting on top of it. And once we got the worms in there, the bin will get its label indicating today's date as its start date and what type of worms are in there. And over here in the more shallow bin, we're going to be putting in the remainder of the material, which is really just the finished compost from that other bin. But it's material that I assume has cocoons in it. That's the reason I labeled this as A and C cocoon. So this will become our cocoon nursery, in which we'll probably start seeing baby worms emerging from whatever cocoons are mixed into that finished compost. So I'm going to put on that glove. We'll get that bin up on the bench so we can extract the worms. We'll put them temporarily into that little container right there. And the finished castings will go into the cocoon nursery, the shallow tub. And then at the end, we'll go ahead and we'll release the worms into their new home. So let's get to work. So this nifty little container always comes in so handy. It seems to be just the right size for getting so many jobs done down here in my wormery. And in this case, the job at hand is giving the worms a little temporary home to live in, just until we can get them situated in their new home. And I mean, technically, I could simply be scooping them out and placing them right into their new home. But for whatever reason, I guess it's just easier this way for me to kind of put them temporarily into the small plastic tub, and then we'll, come on guys, get off. And then we'll get them situated in their new home. It's so difficult to see, so difficult to see the worms on this pink bag because the worms are the same color practically. I guess I should also make sure none of them have sort of squirmed in between the layers of the plastic, which they like to do sometimes too. I guess we'll probably need a piece of plastic to cover up with in the end to hold moisture in. Probably both the, oops, another worm right here. Probably be using plastic to hold the moisture down within the new system as well as in the cocoon nursery. Maybe we'll just dust off this piece of plastic and put it right back into use in one of our other systems. That'll give us a chance to look it over a little bit more thoroughly, make sure we haven't left any worms behind. But let's move some stuff aside here, strictly for the sake of the camera, because the camera sees all these light-colored objects in the frame, and it just makes everything else look like it's completely in shadows and dark. And you could tell right away just from looking at it. Look how dry this stuff is. Look how damp it is. Just the darkness of the color of the brown stuff. Nice and dark over here. Nice and damp under the plastic over here. Not so much. But then again, if you're familiar with worm castings, You don't have to go very deep down to find material that's really doing a great job holding on to its moisture and remaining a nice dampness level. So it's not terribly bad out here, but I did, consciously allow it time to dry during this process to kind of help it become a little bit more flaky and crumbly, but also at the same time become drier, because that's something that the worms tend to not like as much, so they'll go looking for something more damp. And I mean, when you look at some of my so-called African night crawlers, so many people comment on the appearance of my African night crawlers, saying that those aren't African night crawlers. It's hard to say, but that's what I was told that they were when I received them, so I'm continuing to call them that at least until such a time that I can determine exactly what they are, and then I'll call them that. But for now, it's what I was told I'm getting, so that's what I'm calling them. So, not much fanfare here. Let's just go ahead and haul these little guys out. This stuff's pretty dry, so it's not going to stick to my container. So I think we'll just start the scooping of the worms out of here. Last time we checked in here, we had placed these couple of coffee filters out onto the top surface to just cover things up. So that was an opened up cone coffee filter. So the whole size of it is like about this big. I believe this piece of it is already so tattered from worms ripping it up, it's not even a piece that we could place on here anymore. It's just fragments. There was another one right under it, which is apparently in somewhat better shape. But here too, you can see that these worms have really nibbled their way through this paper. Good illustration of the fact that the worms really like the carbon-based foods that you give them, or bedding, because I guess that's probably most similar to what they're used to eating out in nature, decomposing leaves, decomposing wood. They're probably pretty used to this over millions of years, probably well adapted to consuming stuff like wood pulp, which is what paper's made of, so no wonder they seem to be drawn to paper and really like nibbling away at it. All right, let's get to it. Let's get these little guys out of here. See what we could do about sort of creating a better defined division between what's finished castings and what's worms that are being relocated. I guess down low is where some worms might be if they're in the finished castings, because that's the only place where there's any moisture anymore. Out on the surface it's pretty dry. This thing too, wow. Held up pretty good for a while there, but it's pretty beaten up. Sheet of cardboard. Alright, let's see. We'll treat most of this as just finished castings, unless there's a worm or two remaining in it, which we can bring over. And then we just treat the rest of it as just the worms and the material that the worms are occupying, so it too comes with the worms. But we'll try to leave as much of the finished castings behind for garden use and for, well, I guess for sitting around a little bit longer to see if we can maybe fish out some baby worms from it after some time has passed and presumably some cocoons begin hatching. Now, we won't really have a terribly good view of the entire worm population that we're pulling out of here, because a lot of times I do, sort of take the time to separate the worms from the material that they're inhabiting. But in this case, I'm not really planning to do that. I was just going to keep all this stuff sort of in the state that you see it here. Just that while I'm bringing it over, I'm attempting to do a little bit of a reveal of what's within the material as it comes over. So far, as you've seen, it's been pretty densely populated with worms everywhere, and I don't really see many leftovers. This was a pretty large handful, and I felt like there were some large objects in here. There we go. This is just a large chunk of cardboard pretty similar to what you see over here. I believe it was actually one of the earlier dividers we included when we first set up the migration of the worms, and it gotten so beat up we put a replacement for it in when we replenished the food in the migration zone. Alright. It looks like they've done an equally thorough job breaking down the new little dividing wall that we had put up in its place. But yeah, let's not forget, let's get that other chunk of it out of here. I shouldn't have covered it up. Here's a nice chunk of banana leftovers. I just thought that if I could, collect some larger objects along the way to limit what's mixed in with the worms so that it doesn't obscure our view of them so much when we release them, it might make for a more fun worm release. So, that's the only reason I'm taking the extra time, and I'm almost out of space in here too. Geez. Let's keep these stems with the stuff that's going into the new bin. Let's also see if we can get the rest of these guys out of here before they start trying to flee and they end up back in the finished compost. Doesn't matter so much if there's still worms remaining in the finished compost. We'll just be fishing them out once we start seeing babies materializing in the cocoon nursery. So there's a little, you can see all those little bits and pieces of bedding bits that were used to build up this feeding area. Little pieces of cardboard, little pieces of paper. But I think we're pretty much there as far as getting the worms that were in this bin out. I could do a quick little inspection of this very perimeter. I think having that cardboard divider in there helps, it helps me at least see what's going on. I can just kind of reach right into the bin and say, boom, this side's this, that side's that, so be it. So it does seem like we got a couple worms still hanging out right here on the very edge. We'll see if we can collect them up before we move on. But like I said, these finished castings will just sit for quite some time. Any worms that were left behind are suddenly going to have the entire space to themselves, so they can enjoy that for a little while. But then over time, whatever cocoons are in the material will also start producing additional baby worms. And there's good amounts of leftover material as far as food in this stuff, so I wouldn't worry about them going hungry, that's for sure. But worst comes to worst, from what I understand, worms can even continue to just consume their own castings because there's still so much residual nutrient material in them that they can live off them quite fine, repeatedly eating their own castings half a dozen or more times, I believe, before the nutrient value in it is completely depleted. So I think the rest can be treated as finished castings at this point. And at some point, when we start fishing baby worms out of this material, we'll circle back and hopefully round up with these little stragglers too and collect them up as well. So once we start looking for worms in here again, it's going to be little baby worms, but if we start bumping into adult worms at that time, we'll know that it was these ones that just never made it out of this material, or the ones that we failed to collect out of the material that's on the perimeter. So like I said, this stuff's going to go into the cocoon nursery. I'll cover it up, and there's not much more to be seen with that. So I wonder if we should maybe just take care of that now and be done with it. Yeah, why don't we do that? There's another wormy. So there's really not much to it. It's just a matter of putting our cocoon nursery bin out here on the bench and pouring over the stuff. And I'll put the sticker on at the end. Now, if you've seen my channel before, you know that I've got bins that have perforations in them. And this is one of them, so I figured I would try this method of just covering up the holes so I could treat this as a non-perforated container. I think last time I ran one of my perforated containers as a worm bin, I had actually placed it inside of another perforated container, so that between the two of them, I was hoping for at least no holes that line up with each other. So if some of this stuff is pretty fine, pretty granular, if it starts to fall through a hole, hopefully beyond that hole is just another part of plastic of the outer container. But this time I figured I would just try to cover up the holes and see how that works, see how that blue tape holds up to being submerged under worm castings for a while. Okay. I'm kind of focusing on the bin that I'm holding up here as I'm pouring it out, because I don't want to end up with stuff all over the place. So I guess if I find a worm, we're just going to put him back over there with the rest of his friends to be released into the new place. But I wasn't really looking for worms, I got to admit. Like I said, I was trying to keep my eye on what's going on up here, so I don't end up spilling stuff all over the floor or the table. But I thought I saw another worm over here. Once in a while I try to pay a little bit more attention to what's going on here. I thought I saw a worm over there squirming. If we spot him, we'll be sure to bring him over to be with his friends and family for the big move into the new home. I think we're at the point where we can safely just pour stuff out of here anymore. A little surprised that we didn't spot that worm. I mean, I'm guessing that you guys probably saw that worm over and over again while I was looking the other way, but I think we spotted him, and I think I've got him. So we'll keep him with his friends and family. I can't wait to watch the video to see how many worms I missed. But it'll be kind of cool to think that we actually succeeded in, you know, luring the majority of the worms that used to live in their old castings out into the new space. I don't know. What are your impressions of the outcome? We were able to pretty thoroughly watch all the material as it flowed out of this container into its new temporary holding spot, into its nursery tray. I think we managed to get a very large number of them, except for those couple that we ran into along the way, and those were very few. So it did seem like this worm migration over 26 days did a pretty effective job of getting the worms out. Alright, so like I said, this stuff's going to sit around. I'm going to put a cover on it so that it doesn't lose any more of its moisture. Plastic bag. So that's a good segue into bringing back the plastic bag we've been using previously. Here too, if there's any worms still somewhere on this plastic, as there is one right here. Sometimes they like to get in between the sheets of plastic where there's moisture collecting too, and that's where I'll find one once in a while. So I do my best to not let any of my little wormies get stranded on a dry table or fall onto the dry floor and get turned into jerky out there by drying out. So, all right, I think we can actually proceed to the final step, which is releasing the worms into their new home. So let's move on to that. So now this bin that I built for these little guys, it's one of my larger size tubs. I've been using what I refer to as tall and wide or tall and narrow. So they were in a container that I consider as tall and narrow. This is a container that I consider as tall and wide. So these are the larger size containers that I've got. Once we're done, we'll put on this piece of newspaper, this piece of cardboard, get things covered up again. We've even got these pieces of paper that came along for the ride that used to be covering things up in their old container. We'll put those in there as well. Probably just use that stuff as bedding and some future feeding. So the system here is cardboard, newspaper, shreds, obviously leaves. You can see them right here on top. I put some coffee in here as like a a first feeding for them. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. I figured I would do that here. And I put some grit on the coffee too, all around. So once they get in here, they'll have food to eat. Hopefully they enjoy their new home. Let's go get the container that they're in now. I tell you, this thing's got some good weight to it. And with all the bright lights overhead, I would assume that they've probably, for the most part, made their way down to the bottom, which is nice because we're going to flip this thing over. The first thing we're going to run into is whatever's at the bottom of this container. So let's get them situated in their new home. I always want to make sure I haven't left any behind. Sometimes they stick to the container, but hopefully the majority of them are in here. I'll check that again after we step away for a minute and let these guys start getting situated in their new home. There are some food bits in here. Nice big chunk of banana stem. But let's spread this whole block out here so they don't have a very deep dive to go through to get down and out of the light and into the safe bedding below. I mean, for that matter, some of them might actually want to stay in this stuff that they came over in for a little while, perhaps sensing that the material right below it is a little bit foreign to them. But hopefully in time they'll start to wander out into it and get comfortable in it. But I'm gonna give this a little bit of time to run. Just let the camera shoot these little guys getting situated in their new home, and then we'll be done here. Well, it seems to me like these worms are pretty lively. For the most part, I think they're out of view. I think I still see a couple. I mean, I did look away. I was doing some other things there while I was letting these little guys get situated, but other than one I see there, over here, for the most part, it looks like most of them have already scurried out of sight. So these are the piece of paper that were resting on the dry part of the bin that these worms were in. And this is a nice fresh piece of paper that I fashioned for this bin just now to see how it fits. I haven't really slipped it into the container to see how it fits, but it's almost a perfect fit. And a little contrary to what I've been doing lately. Lately I've been using plastic in all my new systems, using moisture retention as the main rationale. But it does seem to me like if we've got what appears to be almost 2 layers of newspaper here already, the first layer doesn't cover the whole thing, but the second one certainly does. And then on top of that, this piece of cardboard as well. I'm thinking we're pretty well protected from excess evaporation happening in here and the bin potentially getting a little overly dry. So I'm going to stick with this for now and we'll see how it goes. See if I can get myself really weaned off plastic. I've always been using various reasons to stick with it here and there. But this being one of those reasons that I would normally use, I think I'm going to try to do without and see if I can, you know, try to provide coverings in my systems that provide a little bit more aeration and airflow. So that makes it official. So please join me in welcoming the newest bin to my wormery. It's the African nightcrawlers, which I've even designated which types they are. These are the ones that I got from the CWL. Can anyone guess what that means? Crazy Worm Lady from Emily. So these African nightcrawlers came from her. I must admit I didn't take the best of care in making sure that they were isolated and separated. There was a point in time when it seemed like they might have been kind of possibly infiltrated by other worms, and that might be what we're really looking at here, not African nightcrawlers. I never know. A lot of people say they don't look like African nightcrawlers, but that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Oh no, I almost forgot. Gotta remember to label the cocoon nursery too. All right, one more time, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.